Mark. Welcome back to part something in the teens of the 53 Chevy project. I haven't put up a video in a few weeks, though I have been working on some things in the background. In this video, I'm going to start by just kind of showing you what I've been up to, and maybe it'll finish up today and go up today, or maybe it'll go up next year. We'll see. But first, let me take you over to my pile of parts for the steering gear and explain to you how that's been going. Okay, so I haven't filmed too much of this process of rebuilding the steering box. And as I've said in other videos, sometimes I don't do that because I'm expecting that I'm gonna screw things up. And I don't want to tell anybody the wrong thing, especially in things like this where I'm just sort of like jumping into it and just kind of seeing if I can figure it out. But now I'm to the point where it's a part. I have an understanding of how it goes back together, and I have some of the parts have already come in, some of the parts are in order. Let me kind of explain how this all works. First off, here is the steering box itself. It is attached to the steering column. As you can see, it's still light blue. So that started off looking like this. As you can see, it was in really rough shape. I had to do a lot of cleaning. Let me tell you, at least in this case, and I imagine probably in all cases, when you take the cover off that oil in there stinks to high heaven. It is terrible. But I got all that grease cleaned out. I don't have a parts washer, so it was just kind of all done like sitting on the floor of my shop with an oil change bucket to catch everything. I was going to put together a video on how I made a puller to pull out like these bearing races and these needle bearings. I'll probably throw some of that in this video, or at least some screenshots, but it wasn't turning out well and my puller sucked. It worked, but it sucked. It's not going to be an inspiration for anyone, so I probably won't do anything with that whole video, but I got it apart, and here's where we're at. Really, the only thing that didn't look great is this one race. You can see that ding in it. So that was really the only damaged part I could see among these. However, it's pretty affordable. So like these bearings here, these are still just a standard size. I just ordered these from an eBay seller. I can put the part numbers up on the screen here. I forget what I paid for these. I think 20 bucks for the pair. So, I mean, that's totally reasonable. While you have it apart, I'll just like that peace of mind knowing it's new. These are a little trickier. You can't really find tapered roller bearings like this anymore that don't have the integrated inner race, because this actually runs on the steering shaft itself. But these come in a set with these from Chevs of the 40s. I have those ordered, but they are on back order. So I am just waiting for those. And in that order was this seal, which is, again, I think kind of a weird one. Not just a standard off-the-shelf seal, but Chevs of the 40s has it. So that is also coming. I think this little section of parts here from them with shipping is going to be around 50 or 60 bucks. The gasket, I haven't found available separately, so I just made it. Another thing I'm going to be doing soon is I'm going to be ordering a kit for blackening of parts. That's how all of these fasteners were done originally, and I just think it'd be nice to redo that, and I'm going to use that throughout the project for other things as well. This is part of the gear selector, like these are the steps for the gear selector. None of this is probably going to work with the new transmission, but I am at least going to get this cleaned up and see what I can do. I might have to make a new one or make this section here. I'm not sure how that's going to shake out. That's something I'll figure out in a year. Another thing, there's a bushing that goes right in here. This bushing I couldn't find available anywhere. McMaster had one that was pretty close that I think would have worked, but one night I was bored and just kind of felt like I needed a challenge, so I just made one. This is a bronze bushing center that I turned down, and then I slipped on a piece of radiator hose and then turned that down, and then slid this bushing over and then turned that down. And the original was steel. This one I think is stainless steel. It just happened to be the scrap I had, but assuming I can reuse this and I need a bushing, I'm just gonna use that one now. It didn't cost me anything. Moral of the story, kids, buy a lathe. I am gonna film the process of putting this all back together. I don't know how long that's gonna take because I'm waiting for these parts to come in, but I'm pretty much ready. I'm just waiting for it, so you will see that process. And I will also show you the blackening process when I redo this hardware too. So the next thing I wanted to talk about wasn't so much a thing that I have done, but a decision I have made, and it is in regard to the axle shafts. So this rear end I'm using is a 1958 build but it came out of a 1960 Chevy. It was in use from 58 to 64, I believe, and I think 55 through 57 is pretty close. I've mentioned in other videos that I just kind of wanted to stick with 1950s Chevy rear end, just so it just kind of looked right. I know a lot of people use like a modern S10 or a Toyota or even like a Monte Carlo Malibu rear end, and those are about the right width so that you can narrow it and run reverse wheels in the back. But again, I just kind of wanted to keep it all 50s Chevy, even though it added a little bit of complexity. The problems come in that it is a not very common rear end. The parts are kind of scarce because a lot of people, if they're building a custom car, they're going to replace it with like a Ford 9-inch or something. If you're building a lowrider, you're going to go, like I just said, S10, Toyota, whatever. Actually refurbishing a 1958 through 64 rear end is kind of weird. So it has a 17 spline here, which is odd. They don't do that anymore. To just get replacement ones off the shelf that are narrower, that is a non-starter. So I have to custom order them if I'm going to replace them. So because of that, I had planned on narrowing this the old school way, which since this doesn't have the C-clip on the end, all it needs to have done is extend the length of these splines and chop it off. Now that would be really easy if this were clay or wood, but being that it's somewhat hard steel, it gets tricky, especially because this is narrower here. So what they would normally do, the old school method, is they'd chuck this up in a welding jig or a lathe, turn it real slow, and then stick weld down as far as they have to go to build this up, then turn it to the same size, then extend these down. I was sort of planning on doing that. The way I narrowed the rear end, I narrowed it 1.5 inches on both sides. The axle shafts are 3-inch different in length. So now that I've narrowed it 1.5 inches, the old long shaft can go onto the new short side. Is that right? The old short go on the long? I don't remember. It's a confusing mess, but basically the way I narrowed it, I can move one to the other side and then just chop 3 inches off the other one. I've decided after putting all that time into the rear end, all the money it's gonna be to replace all the bearings and all the seals and everything, I don't wanna have in the back of my mind like, hey, remember that rear axle back there that I stick welded and turned down at home, and like, is that gonna hold up? I don't know. So I decided to just order axle shafts. The price is really reasonable. I'm probably gonna be going through Dutchman, and the price with bearings and axle plates pressed on before shipping, we're going to be like just under $500. So I feel like that's pretty reasonable. It's a big expense for this car. I probably haven't spent $500 on this car total in the last 10 years, but we're getting to the point where I'm going to have to start spending some money. So that's one of the first things I'm going to order is going to be new axle shafts from Dutchman. Completely stock everything, just 1.5 inches narrower per side. And then I'll have to get the bearings and everything, put it all together. It's, like I said, it's going to be, kind of a big expense and a lot of work, but the rear axle is kind of important. So that's it. Didn't want to ramble on too long about that, but just want to let you know you're not going to see a video of me stick welding and turning and hobbing that out because I don't trust my skills. Okay, so this concludes the blabbing for this episode. Next, we're going to cut away to some time lapse. I'm going to head out to the shop where the car is. Now that I have the 4-link stuff hooked up, the only thing left, I think, that needs to be actually welded on the frame is the rear bridge that's going to support the rear springs and cylinders and stuff. I can't get the metal for that right now. Again, global pandemic. So I think the plan for today is I'm going to disassemble everything on the frame, flip it upside down, because I have a whole bunch of welding to do from the underside. It's not going to be fun, but it has to get done. So here we go. kind of struggling trying to do it without using the engine hoist, because last time I flipped it over, I just did it by myself. I just lifted up one side and flipped it over, but after wrapping the frame and putting in the transmission mounts and all that stuff, it's a lot heavier now. So we finally got it, but I'm not doing any welding. I'm going home. So from this clip, it should probably pick up with some time lapse of me cleaning up the underside of this thing. See you in the next one. Calling it a day. That 2 minutes you just saw there took about 2 hours in time lapse. I got a lot of progress made, but I'm getting old and my back just can't handle the being hunched over like that for more than a couple hours. But I got a whole bunch of these welds put in, ground back with the flap wheel, and then I go back a second time and take care of any little pinholes or anything so that it can be grinded smooth. I also filled in a bunch of the holes that the K-member used to bolt to. I no longer need those for the K-member or for mocking up the brake pedal, because that's all done. Yeah, I got more welding and grinding in my future, but I think that's where I'm gonna call it here. Probably won't be back out for a while. Thanks for watching part 13, and we'll have part 14 coming to you within the next 6 months. See you in the next one.